Again, that's a pretty significant thing. Quote, Common Core eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. Do we have any teachers here? You guys hold me honest, all right? We got a couple of teachers, but I'm telling you a lie. 22-year teacher here. Aren't there times when you're teaching 25 school kids and they're looking at you like you're from the moon? They don't understand a word you're saying. Sometimes you have to throw the textbook out, sometimes you have to throw the curriculum out. There are times when, in order to reach the kids sitting in front of you, you have to get creative. You have to figure out how to reach those kids. How do you do that when the whole thing is scripted? How do you do that when your teachers are terrified if they teach anything that's not going to be on the test, or teach any methods that aren't approved by the testers, that they will not be rehired? You can't do it. She's right. Common Core impedes creativity in the classroom, and it eliminates creativity and impedes collaboration. We also know that high-stakes standardized tests are simply designed to rank and sort our children, and they contribute significantly to racial discrimination and the achievement gap in American schools. You understand this? You cannot possibly craft one test for 60 million American kids that's going to tell you anything meaningful about those kids. How could you possibly do that? How could the teacher of your granddaughter, how could that teacher learn anything at all from those big tests that will help your teacher teach your granddaughter? Nothing. This has absolutely no classroom value at all. None. All this is data gathering. All this is bureaucratic bean counting. All this is actuary stuff. The data they gather from these tests is meaningless. And I'll prove that to you in a few minutes. Has no value for classroom teachers. So why are you doing it? And you notice that ever since we got to the Department of Education, you're doing it more and more. We didn't have much national testing before the Department of Education. The very first time we did really well in school. You look at the arc of American achievement in education from 1900 through about 1975. Our kids are doing extremely well, especially given the challenges our country has that no other country. People keep talking about countries like Finland and Singapore. We got to do things like they do. You can't do things like they do. Finland is a tiny, tiny nation, smaller than about half of the American states. It has an almost homogeneous population, certainly compared to the United States. They don't have overwhelmingly the kind of ethnic divides, social divides, monetary divides our country has. And of course, they also have, in places like Finland, in real ways, a lot less freedom in meaningful ways. Why? How do you think? It's apples and oranges, right? People see, they point to these small, oftentimes European social democrat states and insist that our country can be that. No, it can't be. And I'm not sure you'd want it to be. You want to pay 50% of your income in taxes? For what exactly? And so what do you got here? A situation where the Department of Education was created in the late 1970s, and the very first thing they did was hire textbook companies and publishing companies to create big exams, national exams, to tell us where our kids were. And guess what? Those textbook companies want to sell you stuff. The argument I always make is this, and again, tell me if I'm wrong about this. The argument I make is this. Nothing has changed in math education for our kids from 5 to 17, 15, from kindergarten through high school. Nothing's really changed in math education in about 2,000 years. Have we invented a new number I'm unaware? Have we slipped in some new geometric system? No, it's the same. I get that by the time you get to calculus, things vary, but nothing new. If that's true, shouldn't you be able to buy one math textbook and use it for 60 years till it's worn out? But see, if you do it that way, then companies like Pearson aren't going to be able to make money. So what happened? Your federal government, the Department of Education, in the late 1970s, commissioned textbook companies to create big tests. Guess what those tests proved? All our kids were failing, our schools were failing, everything was a failure. Have you noticed, ever since we got the Department of Education, every 5 years now we throw everything out and start over? And all this new money has to be spent off. Who's getting rich off that? The companies who sell you that junk. Did you know that last year alone, your federal government paid Pearson Publishing $350 million to produce the tests, to score them? We'll talk about that. But $350 million paid to Pearson Publishing. Pearson then, and that's their job. even if you hadn't paid Pearson all that money, they still would have produced that stuff, because that's what they're in business for. But your federal government paid them to do the job they otherwise would have done. And then when Pearson produced all that stuff, they turned around and sold it to states like Florida and kept all the money. You know what that's called? That's crony capitalism. The federal government was legally obligated to bid out those contracts to try to get the best deal. They didn't do it. They gave it to Pearson. Did you know that Pearson is the second largest private donor to Common Core after Bill Gates? So, pretty good investment. And you just brought it up, man. You know this will blow your mind. You know who the third largest donor to private Common Core is? It's the Gaddafi family in Libya. The Gaddafi billions. Right now, Pearson has opened branches of Pearson Publishing in places like Kuwait and Qatar. And right now, they're putting American Common Core, trying to put American Common Core in Middle Eastern schools. And what do they get? What's the quid pro quo? Have you all seen these really strange, in the Pearson textbooks, Muslim advocacy assignments? You've got kids being asked to come to school wearing burqas. You've got kids now reciting in class the 5 pillars of Islam without any Christian or Jewish education. There's no cross day. There's no yarmulke day. You're doing Muslim advocacy. That's the price Pearson's paying, because Pearson provides 90% of the textbooks for Common Core in your public schools are Pearson Publishing textbooks. And so they're filling those with a lot of world religion stuff that is designed, they're absolutely revisioning Islam in our American schools. And they're not doing it with other religions. There's no balance there. That's the price you pay for getting all that money coming in from the Middle East, right? And not only did Karen Lewis say that, but the entire Chicago Teachers Union crafted 30 different anti-Common Core resolutions. Can't reach all of them, just a couple. And again, this is the radical progressive Chicago teachers who did this. Quote, instructional and curriculum decisions should be in the hands of classroom professionals who understand the context and interests of their students. What a revolutionary idea. Let the educators work up the tests. The teachers teaching the kids have a say in what gets done. So that was never done here. And, quote, the education of children should be grounded in developmentally appropriate practice. The first person today who calls Common Core developmentally inappropriate, especially at the youngest grades, is not me. It's the Chicago Teachers Union. You're going to see this like a dozen times today. And I'll show you the evidence of what they mean by that. Quote, who did this? Common Core standards were developed by non-practitioners, non-educators, including who? Quote, education reform foundations, such as the Gates, the Broad Foundation. The resolution says that, quote, as a result, these standards better reflect the interests and priorities of corporate education reformers than the best interests and priorities of teachers and students. The people running this show, I told you from the beginning, they're not educators. They're not interested in making your kids better at math or reading or science. None of it. And we sold our soul, Florida, for this, right? How about, this is my favorite, and I wish you could see the date on this. It's January 29th, 2015, 3 months ago. The entire Washington State Democrat Party called for an immediate withdrawal for Common Core. This is a big deal. The Washington State, if you want to run, look, everybody who runs for public office in Washington State is a Democrat, right? And so if you want to win public office as a Democrat in Washington State, you have to agree to this platform or you will get no Democrat Party money. 3 months ago. If I didn't tell you it was the Washington State Democrats, you would think it was the Tea Party. The Central Committee of the Washington State Democrat Party passed a resolution that roundly condemns the Common Core standards. This is the first time a statewide Democrat Party committee has taken a public position against the Core, and it happened in the backyard of the Gates Foundation, which has provided the funding that made the National Standards Project possible. Do you see, even in the Democrat Party's own argumentation, they don't call them state-led. They point out that they're national standards. And then how about this? Here's the actual resolution. Whereas the copyrighted and therefore unchangeable local control hardening, the copyrighted and therefore unchangeable Common Core state standards are a set of controversial, top-down academic standards that were promulgated by wealthy private interests without any research-based validity that they're going to work, and which are developmentally inappropriate at the lowest grades. And whereas, as a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling in state education policy, I have got to stop and do a quick little happy dance. Democrats say the Constitution. Democrats say the Constitution. And what do they know, Florida, that your Republicans don't know in the legislature? That should shame us all. As a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling, 2 unaccountable private trade associations, the NGA and the CCSSO, have received millions of dollars in funding from the Gates and others to create the Common Core, and whereas the U.S. Department of Education improperly pressured state legislatures into adopting the Common Core and the high-stakes tests based on them as a condition of competing for federal race-to-the-top stimulus funds that should have been doled out on the basis of need, and whereas implementation of Common Core will cost school districts hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for standardized computer-based tests, new technology, new curriculum, and teacher training, at a time when Washington State is already insufficiently funding K-12 basic education. All of this without any proven benefits to students from Common Core, and whereas some states have already withdrawn from the standards. Therefore, be it resolved that we call upon the Washington State Legislature and the Superintendent of Public Instruction to withdraw from Common Core and keep K-12 education student-centered and accountable to the people of Washington State. And here you are, applauding Washington State Democrats. Are you going to correspondingly boo your Florida Republicans? Because you better. Good. Gotta hold them accountable. You gotta hold them accountable. At every state they told you, give us more power and we'll take care of you. They're not doing it. They took the power you gave them and they've stabbed you in the back, and they've stabbed your kids in the back. Gotta hear about the Democrats. They are what they are. You don't blame a skunk for stinking. You don't. They are what they are. Your Republicans, on the other hand, look you in the eye and say one thing and do another. It's not acceptable anymore. And for the ones, here goes Jeb Bush, who wants to mock people like you for opposing Common Core, blaming it all on right-wing extremism. There you go, right? And everything, I told you, everything we said was going to happen 3 years ago is now happening. Like, for instance, this is going to cost all kinds of money, Florida, that you don't have. Do you think winning that money that you won, you think you're going to keep getting it every year to keep doing Common Core? Give you an example. The date on this is January 31st of this year, January this year, 3 months ago. The state of California, so what's happening? The school districts who have to spend all this money to upgrade their computers, they're suing the state to be reimbursed, or else they're going to have to close. It's costing millions of dollars for these schools to do this. They don't have that money. And let's face it, the state took the standards, the schools didn't. And so if the state took the standards and forces the schools to use them like your state's doing, then the state has to pay for that. And while that sounds satisfying, when we say the state, who's going to have to pay that money? You are. The District of California could be liable for as much as $1 billion a year in costs if a group of school districts succeeds in winning reimbursement for expenses associated with the implementation of computer-based tests in the Common Core and other new standards. 4 unified districts, Santa Ana, Vallejo, Plumas, and Porterville, and the Plumas County Office of Education filed a claim to classify the tests as state mandates. And isn't that what your legislature tells you? We were at a talk last night. We had a school board member there. He said the reason we can't do that much is because the state mandates the tests. We can't do anything about that. I'm not sure I agree with him on that, but okay. I agree that the state mandates the test, and if Florida's mandating the test, Who's going to have to pay for the expense? You are. You have a lot of very, very poor rural school districts in this state. It's estimated that for the 1,028 school districts in California, it's going to cost $1 billion a year for at least 10 years before they can even begin to get everything up to speed. Your costs won't be that high, but they'll be really high. So who's paying that? You think the feds are paying that? And then you get this, bullying. Please tell me, the date for this is also the end of January 2015 this year. So if Common Core is really state-led, Mr. Bush, then how come the federal government is blackmailing states to try to get out of it? I haven't even had time to add this to the slides yet. I will do so as soon as I get home. But did you hear about 4 days ago what Army Duncan said, your Secretary of Education? Right now, the tests are going on in most states. In New York State alone, 200,000 plus New York City school kids opted out of the exam. We have an entire junior class in Seattle that opted out of the exams. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people across the country are opting out of these exams. So guess what Arnie Duncan said 4 days ago? If the states don't stop kids from opting out, the federal government will have to intervene. That's big time. Your kids in Florida are legally allowed to opt out. I've read the statute. It's like every other state. In Florida, your state is obligated, mandated to offer tests. That doesn't mean your kids have to take it. In fact, with all the kids opting out in Florida, don't you think if they could punish them for it, they would have done it already? Don't you think your venal schools, if they could have forced your kids to those exams, would have done it? Of course they would have. But the state knows they can't. And so the federal government, you see what happens? It's not working for them. The more moms and dads that know what Common Core is, the more kids who opt out of the exams. Now the feds take the mask of neutrality off. Now that the states are finding it impossible to enforce the tests, now the feds take off the mask and step in and say, if you don't do it, we will. There's your imperial federal government. He's the Secretary of Education. He's never been elected to anything. He has no legislative power over anybody. And he's threatening the states that if you don't force your kids into those tests, I will. Out of control, anybody? And so here's the threat. The date was 3 months ago, January of this year. And you already saw what happened. The entire state of Illinois is 100% Common Core compliant. Every school district is giving the test except Chicago. Chicago said they will only give these meaningless tests to 10% of their school districts. Their schools in the district. There are 600 schools in the Chicago area. They're only going to test 60 just to say they did it. They will not give the rest. And simply for that one school district, the federal government is going to withhold over $1 billion of federal funds from the state of Illinois. Chicago Public Schools' decision to administer new Common Core student tests to only about 10% of the city's 600 schools could cost the state over $1 billion in federal aid. In a recent letter to Illinois Superintendent of Schools, Christopher Koch, former U.S. Education Secretary Deborah Delisle made it clear the state could lose as much as $1.17 billion in federal education funding next year if Chicago schools don't comply with Common Core testing requirements. One school district in a whole state, and the feds say, you get everybody on board or we give you nothing. Who's in control of this? Mr. Bush. Who's in control of this? You see how, we're up to number 4 if you're paying attention, of these lies they keep telling you that aren't true. And the only reason we couldn't prove it 3 years ago is because we didn't see it in action. Now, 3 years later, we see it. And now, every day, more confirmation comes. But you know what? You don't need to lie. I said to me, you don't trust me. You don't need to trust me. You shouldn't trust me. I'm wearing bad shoes. I got a bad haircut. I'm some cheesehead carpetbagger come down to hoodwink you poor Southern groups. Don't trust me. Trust the guys who did this to you. Trust the people who did this. How many of you have heard the lie about Common Core? That it's rigorous. Raise your hand. How many of you have heard the lie about Common Core? That it's better than what you had. Okay, I already asked you the question, how could you possibly know that, Common Core, when the vast majority of the country is only now being tested on us. How do you know that? But don't listen to us, listen to Bill Gates. This is from 2013, 2 years ago. Here's the idea man who bankrolled the whole thing.
It would be great if our education stuff worked, but that we won't know for probably a decade.
Okay. So 2 years ago, Bill Gates said, we're not going to know if Common Core even works till 2025. Benchmarked, rigorous, better than what you have. You do realize, right? Your kids are guinea pigs. They're doing all of this mindless nonsense, spending all of this money, seizing all of this control for something they don't even know is going to work. You remember back, and we have precedent for this isn't new. Remember back in 2002 when Jeb's older brother gave us No Child Left Behind? By the way, George W. Bush didn't write No Child Left Behind. Who did George W. Bush allow to write No Child Left Behind education policy? Ted Kennedy. Uber-conservative right-wing nut George W. Bush allowed the most liberal member of the Senate to completely write the No Child Left Behind legislation. 10 years later, it was a disaster. Everybody wants out of it. The teachers hate it. We spent billions and billions of dollars on it. And you want to know the really dirty little secret? Common Core is nothing but No Child Left Behind on steroids. This is what gets me. The worst aspects of Common Core, of No Child, are back in Common Core. The one-size-fits-all education, the meaningless high-stakes standardized tests, the inordinate government control, it's the same thing. So now all those principals and superintendents who hated No Child Left Behind now love Common Core. You know what the difference was? Bush wasn't smart enough to bribe the states with hundreds of billions of dollars of money. That's all. That's the only difference, right? And so what do you got here? You heard the man. We're not even going to know for 10 years. How about a little bit more Bill Gates for you? How many, I think, let's go on to what I think is the most dangerous lie of Common Core yet, the sixth myth we're going to take down. How many of you have heard, you know, Common Core, you're getting all worked up over nothing. Common Core is just a set of standards. It's not curriculum. Our teachers can teach any way they want to the standards. How many of you have heard that? How could that possibly be true? Whoever controls the tests controls what and how your kids are going to teach. Doesn't it have to be that way? There is no other mechanism for assessing Common Core. Your teachers can give all the Common Core quizzes they want. They don't count for anything. All that counts are those big national tests. Listen to Bill Gates make the same argument way back in 2009 before anybody had heard of this.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests. Next generation assessments aligned to the Common Core.
Listen to this.
When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well.
And that's happening now. For the first time in the United States, this month, the tests are being aligned to the standards. And when the tests are aligned to the standards, the curriculum will line up as well. Your teachers will teach what they're told, how they're told. End of discussion. 2009. Did you also hear that little bombshell he dropped there? $350 million of the stimulus package. Did you know they were bailing out the Federal Department of Education in 2009? 350 million of the billions they received from the bailout went to create these tests. Before, when you were being told the states were busy putting this together. As he just told you, the feds are in charge of the tests. When the tests align with the standards, which is right now, the curriculum's going to line up as well. And you're being told now in Florida by your legislature that they're not even going to release the test scores this fall. If they do, they won't even be until this fall. And they're already thinking about pushing the release of this year's tests to 2 years out. Why? Because they know what's going to happen when you see the test results. Your kids were forced to take the tests. Your legislators, including the Republicans, sold your kids out to the tests. Now those same Republicans are complicit in telling you you're not going to get to see the results. Because by the time we show them to you 2 years from now, it'll be way too late for you to do anything about it. That's what your government's doing. they told you, and think about the arrogance of this. Arnie Duncan says that unless you take those tests, we might put you in jail. We got school kids in various states now being threatened by state administrators that if you don't take the test, you can be jailed, even though that's not true. So if your kid doesn't take the test, you might go to jail. Meanwhile, we have no obligation to ever release those test scores to you because you might not like them. Oh, we'll keep testing your kids. We just won't show you the scores. How is this not, for lack of a better word, fascist behavior? And that right there is David Coleman. There's the guy, right? That's the guy who is the chief architect of the standards. The guy, well, let me show, don't listen to me, listen to him. Let's see what kind of educational background David Coleman has. When he was being introduced in 2011 at a conference about his Common Core.
He has been involved in virtually every step of setting the national standards, but he doesn't have a single credential. He's never taught in an elementary school. Actually, no. He's never edited scholarly journal, but I think he edited scholarly papers. And a variety of other things that everybody here has done somehow. He hasn't done.
You'd think someone with Lauren's experience would understand you never tell the truth when you introduce yourself.
I actually think it's really important to try to base what I'm about to say to you on evidence I share with you rather than on the sands of my qualifications. So if I ask you or talk to you about doing something, it should be evident that it makes sense to me to do because I have no other authority.
Because I have no other authority. And how much confidence does that put in your state educational people when they're laughing about it, right? That little woman gets up there and she says, he's done nothing, but this is funny. It's really, really funny that the guy in charge of transforming American schools has no qualifications. Isn't that just a hoot? Isn't that just wonderful? That this is the guy writing the SATs? That your kids are gonna go to school for 11, 12 years before they take those exams. And now the only thing that's going to matter is what this guy says is important, not how well they can do it. Good, isn't that funny? Because that's what you got here. Oh, and it gets even better. Here's David Coleman. All right, listen to this little gem.
So with that in mind, I'm about to jump in, but I'm just going to say one word about my own organization, which is Student Achieving Partners. Student Achieving Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple of things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards.
We are that collection of unqualified people who were involved in creating the standard. Isn't that wonderful? And what does it tell you? That the people doing this to you don't even think they have to lie to you anymore. Now, if there's one thing that should chill you, it's that. They don't think enough of your power, they don't think enough of your liberty, they don't think enough of your rights to even pretend they're doing this for you anymore. I ask you, why in the world am I here? Why in the world are we having this debate when the people who did this have told you again and again and again, way, way back, 2009, 11, 12, why they did this? And how do you look your former governor in the eye with all of this and conclude anything other than he's either colossally ignorant or he's lying to your faces? Because it's got to be one of the two, and I have ruled out ignorance. And then, you really want to get mad? You really want to get mad? There he is again, one more time. You want to make the argument, do you, that they're just standards, our teachers can do what they want? Okay, let's listen to the man.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving, there's no amount of saying, they teach the standards, not the test, we don't do that here, whatever.
So little David Coleman, without any experience, he's bigger than the Pope, the Emperor, the King, because there's no force on earth that's going to stop your teachers from teaching to our test. You can wave your hands, Governor Bush. and say all you want, that our teachers teach to the standards, not the test, whatever. Like a teenage girl, right? Whatever. Your teachers will do what we tell them to do. Now you understand why the unions are blocking? I'm gonna play that for you one more time. Because I want this burned into your brain so that no amount of mental bleach can purge it out. No hand-wringing Republican good old boy shakes your hand and tells you we're going to fix this. No more Governor Bush, I'll vote for him because shucks, he's better than Hillary Clinton. I want this seared into your brain because people like your governor abet, support, promote this garbage and mock anyone who challenges it. Let's go back and listen to our little emperor here.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving, there's no amount of saying, they teach the standards, not the test, we don't do that here, whatever.
Whatever indeed, Mr. Coleman. And ladies and gentlemen, the next President of the United States! Can I put her up here? Because 1 week ago, 7 days ago, in Iowa, running for president, here's what Miss Clinton had to say about you and your ability to educate your children.
You know, when I think about the really unfortunate argument that's been going on around Common Core, it's very painful. How do we end up at a point where we are so negative about the most important non-family enterprise in the raising of the next generation, which is how our kids are educated?
You heard that. Education is a non-family enterprise. The single most important thing your kids are going to do outside the family is be educated. I'm upset that people are so negative about Common Core because it really isn't up to you how your kids are educated. You are not the ones who have the final say, the main say, or anyone that really gets down to it, any say at all. And you know, 20 years ago, she at least conceded it took a village. Maybe mom and dad would be allowed in that village, but her thinking has evolved, hasn't it now? The most important non-family experience, really? I tell you, the people in charge already don't believe your kids belong to you. They don't. They don't believe you are the primary teacher, educator, parent of those kids. They don't believe that. This is the Center for, what's the name? Can you read that? The Center for what? I forgot what it was. So I want you to know where I got this from.
Center for Teaching Quality.
Center for Teacher Quality, yeah, that's right. You can go to their website, the Center for Teaching Quality. They've done a comprehensive survey with very good data of the amount of time on average that kids are testing in Common Core classrooms.
February 2015.
Thank you. This is February this year, February 2015. They've done the best analysis so far of how much time every year kids will be prepping for tests or testing. The average fourth grader, you can't read it, the average fourth grader in America, composite, is going to be testing for 51 out of 180 school days. 51. And fourth grade isn't even considered a major testing year. Third grade is a bigger one. So if your kids are testing for roughly 50 days out of 180 days, how much class time is not being devoted to, teaching them stuff? And that's part of the problem. Your teachers will teach to our tests. So your teachers become nothing more than, like when your kid's going to take the SAT and you used to hire a tutor to help them do better, that's what your teachers have become. Army Duncan last year called for the renaming of teachers, and many of the Pearson textbooks are already doing it. Facilitators, not teachers. He doesn't want them called teachers. A teacher is somebody who has individual wisdom to be able to hand off to a kid. A facilitator is merely somebody who's handed something and hands it off to somebody else. And in California, I was in California last month, and a bunch of the moms there showed me some of the textbooks. Do you know what California's renaming their teachers? Standbys. Literally, the kids, and under Common Core, the kids are self-directed. They get all the materials from companies like Pearson, uploaded on their little iPods. The teachers don't have textbooks, the kids just study what's been handed to them, and literally for California, the teachers stand by in case something has to be done. Some kid can't get his computer to turn on, all right? They're standbys. Let me skip through this real quick. All right, now look, we are going to look at the standards, and we're downhill. If you give me another half hour, 30 minutes, we'll be done, 35 minutes. I want to look at the standards here. But before I do, before we leave this, I have to ask you one more time. Even if you think you like the standards, even if you think national standards are somehow useful, although there's no evidence for that, even if you think you love big-time Common Core tests that take months and months, even if you think those things, how in the world do we sit by and let this happen the way it happened? Let the people who did it do it without any representation, without any oversight, without any control. How do we let that happen? If you allow this, we just aren't, we're not a constitutional republic anymore. We are no longer a free people. There is no, Hillary Clinton got one thing right. There is no more important thing than how we educate our kids, because that determines how the country's going to be. Abraham Lincoln, right? The philosophy of the classroom in one generation is the philosophy of government in the next. It takes just one generation of kids, miseducated. And when they become the adults running the show, and haven't you seen that over the last 30 years? Who is it that are the primary supporters of gay marriage? Kids 18 to 30. Why? No 14-year-old, no 9-year-old, no 11-year-old spends time thinking about gay marriage. Where did they get their newfound activism from? Campus, at colleges, now in elementary and middle schools they're getting it too. This is the problem, isn't it? Demographically, as kids roll through the public, why do you think it is that the president wants mandatory pre-K? We have 30 years of Head Start data. All that money dumped into Head Start programs, it's proven nothing. It doesn't help kids statistically at all. All that money has no impact other than removing kids from parents and dumping them in federal schools. Mandatory pre-K, he wants to pay for 2 free years of community college now. The average college senior, the average college student, can't get a 4-year degree in 4 years. It's taken our kids 5 and 6 years to do what you and I did in 4, sometimes 3 years. They can't do it. Meanwhile, they're racking up all that student loan debt. And people forget the very first thing the president did, the very first thing when he took office, was not to skip over to Egypt and apologize for America. The very first thing the president did when he took office was federalize the student loan program, which means everybody goes to school, even if they're going for something they can't possibly get a job in. And the universities are taking kids that don't belong because the feds are paying all the money for them. Who cares if a kid comes to college and fails out in 2 years? That's 2 years if the university gets paid regardless. That's what's happening. You know this frightening statistic, right? Our college kids and recent graduates, they owe over $1 trillion in student loan debt, trillion with a T. Our kids owe more in student loan debt than the collective credit card debt of the whole country. You think that's ever getting paid back? And I'll tell you who the next president's going to be. It's going to be whoever promises on the campaign trail, you elect me, and I'll waive all that debt. Can you imagine being 18 to 35 years old, having $40, $60, $120,000 in student loan debt? I think you'll swallow your principles and you'll vote for Hillary Clinton. Because, let's face it, which of the candidates is most likely to pull a scheme like that? And so there's a great, great big axe hanging over the head of voters, isn't it? But that's not by design either. Why do you think the federal government's in the student loan business? To help kids? Or to put them on the hook? To make them dependent? The whole thing is complicated, but it's a scam. I'm going to give you one tiny little last history lesson. We're done with history. I can show you what we mean. I wanted to simply show you today what we mean by developmentally inappropriate. Because you need to know what that means. Because there are absolute, definable, provable points that experts have made about how these standards aren't just indoctrinating your kids. They are harming them. And I'll show you that. Last little history lesson. In 2011, 12, 13, when the standards were finally being put together, the Common Core people hired a group of 29 outside people to come to Washington, D.C. Interesting, the states did this, but they just happened to meet in Washington. 29 outside people to go to Washington, D.C. and to look over the standards. This committee was called the Validation Committee. They were given carte blanche by the Common Core people You can throw the standards out, you can rewrite them, you can edit them, you can approve them, whatever you want to do. Interestingly, they only invited one English specialist who had any experience writing national standards, one. And they only invited one math professor who had any experience writing national standards, one of 20. 2 of 29 were the only ones that had any experience. Do you know what they both voted? They both voted no, throw the standards out. The English professor is a woman by the name of Dr. Sandra Stotsky. She's been to your state half a dozen times at least, warning your legislature about how bad this is. And she is considered one of the foremost ELA, English Language Arts specialists in the world. That's why they hired her. She said about Common Core, and I quote, "These standards in English and writing and comprehension will set our kids 2 years behind the 2 years they're already behind the high-achieving countries in the world. 3 years behind the high-achieving nations in the world in terms of reading, writing, and comprehension. Get rid of them now," she said. The math professor, if you can believe it, is an even more impressive guy. A fellow by the name of Professor James Milgram. He's been to Florida. He is a retired Stanford University math professor. Most of the math that was done in the late 60s that got us to the moon, that was his math. He was the wunderkind mathematician for NASA who did most of the math calculations to put us there. He said of Common Core math, and I quote, "It is an absolute joke to think that Common Core math is going to prepare your kids for STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and math, or even for 4-year math colleges. It's not going to happen. Get rid of these standards immediately." That was Professor Milgram. So this comes right from, the punchline to the whole little story. Do you know what your Common Core committee, Jim and Sandy managed to convince other people on that committee to vote no. You know what the Common Core did? They just erased them from the final document. They just cut them out of the document, blacked out everything they said, and they validated with the remaining people. That's why Milgram and Stotsky are traveling the country, doing what I and thousands of other people are doing, trying to warn you about this. They were in the room, they saw it all, they said it was a disaster, they were the only 2 people on the committee who had any experience trying to craft a national standard. And so there you sit, right? This comes from Sandy, and it makes perfect sense to me as an English professor. What's wrong with the English standards? Well, for starters, at every grade, now you got to keep in mind, this is predicated on the idea that you cannot separate the standards from the pedagogy. Your teachers went home a couple years ago, one bright June morning for summer vacation, and they came back in the fall, and all the textbooks were gone. Sometimes they were replaced with Common Core textbooks, but more likely there were no textbooks at all. Suddenly on all their computers had been uploaded apps from places like Pearson and McGraw-Hill that had all the pedagogy, all the worksheets, even the lesson plans already prefabricated for them. Your teachers had to learn from scratch how to teach Common Core. How do you think they learned it? The only tools they had were the things handed to them by the schools, all presented from companies like Pearson, second largest private donor, making billions of dollars off this. Try to teach your teachers how to teach Common Core without the Pearson textbooks. There's no way to do it. There's nothing else. It's never been done before. How do you separate the pedagogy from the standards? You can't. There are no standards without the pedagogy. And at every level, Common Core mandates that kids do 50% less reading and 50% more writing. Even little kids who haven't learned to read well are already having to write. This is developmentally inappropriate. We know every metric shows that when kids only learn how to write well after they've developed a significant level of reading. If you make kids write significantly before you teach them how to read, they never get better as readers, and their writing never evolves either. All the metrics for 100 years of data show this. But at every grade level, Common Core has the kids writing more. They're reading a lot less. And so right from the get-go, this is a problem, and Sandy raises the point. If they're writing so much, but they're not reading much, what in the world are they writing about? And you've all seen, if you've been paying attention, these really screwy Common Core writing assignments, the odd lessons, the very tendentious things, like when Wisconsin, 3 or 4 years ago, when little 8-year-olds, little 3rd graders, were sent home, an entire school district were sent home and told to write an essay on how the state is just like the family, but better. These kinds of writing prompts. The other big problem with Common Core English is Common Core mandates at every grade level a minimum baseline of 50% of the traditional literature your kids used to read in English class. The stories are pulled out in favor of informational texts, many of which come directly from the federal government. Why is it so important to read books, stories in English class? Well, when you put your kids to bed at night, the purpose is to get them to sleep, right? So when you put your kids or grandkids to bed, why do you read them stories that get their little hearts thumping, their little eyelids fluttering? When you're putting your kids to bed, you're reading them stories that stimulate them. If you wanted to put your kids to bed, shouldn't you read them a Bill Gates computer manual? I mean, wouldn't it work? But you don't, because intrinsically you understand, don't you? That kids only learn to love reading, to want to read through stories. More than half the storytelling in Common Core is taken out, and it's replaced with one-sided government propaganda at very young ages, which is and you should keep in mind that Stotsky and Milgram are both lifetime Democrat voters, because we're continuing that meme, aren't we? This is not right-wing stuff. As Sandy points out, well, why do we read the classics? Why do we read things like Shakespeare? Well, that's why I became a Shakespeare professor, not because I was boring and wanted to do something nobody cared about. Because when you read the great classic writers, you are teaching kids big issues. Love, peace, justice, truth, war. Nobody ever wrote better about love, and nobody ever wrote better about war than Shakespeare did. These are realities. And in reading those stories and learning about the characters, whether the kids even know it or not, you're helping to frame them, their ethics, their morals, their character, without being political. When you read Shakespeare, does anybody have any idea how Shakespeare would have voted on illegal immigration? When you read Jane Austen, anybody know how old Jane would have voted about green energy technology? No. When you read the classics, you are reading about the big questions, but now you're taking those books out, and you're replacing them with very one-sided political props, like this. But these are the recommended exemplar texts in English class through Common Core. Here's just a handful of them. By the time your daughter's a freshman in high school, by the time she's in 9th grade, they'll be reading things like Recommended Levels of Insulation, a report released in 2010 by the EPA in the Department of Education. I've read it. It's a 50-page regulatory manual. It's not even sentences, it's just regulation about the environmentally correct way to insulate new buildings. This is the kind of thing that's going to make your daughter want to fall in love with reading. By the time your son's in 10th grade, they're reading an English class. You understand what's happening here? English isn't English anymore. It's not about ideas. It's not about reading and writing anymore. It's about sociology, which is pretty much what Common Core is about. You got Arnie Duncan, the sociologist in the White House. They're reading President Obama's own executive orders. Executive Order 13423, strengthening federal environmental, energy, and transportation management. Sandy estimates that about 30-35% of all the informational texts available for Common Core textbooks deal exclusively with man-made global warming, present no counter-arguments, and blame America exclusively for the problem. It's not a global problem, it's an American problem. 35%. As Sandy points out, critical thinking is when you teach kids multiple perspectives on issues and you let them decide. Why in the world is English class becoming a global warming class? Because sociology demands it, but not English. A long essay for 10th graders on the evolution of the grocery bag. Read that too. Spoiler alert in case you want to dash out and get it. Paper and plastic are both bad, and America's destroying the planet. As Sandy says, and she's exactly right, you get much less classic literature now and much more of these informational texts. And I say to my liberal friends out there, you think you like this because it's all liberal. Well, what if the next president happens to be an evil right-winger and puts a right-winger in charge of the Department of Education? You gonna be happy then when your liberal school kids have to read white-wing propaganda? You're not gonna like that, I bet. Think about what this means now. Who gets to determine what and how your kids are reading? Not good for anybody. And then there's this, which is even more alarming. Sandy asks a great question. Of that little actual literature. By the way, you should also know this. There's a big movement now in Common Core. They're probably not going to write formal Common Core history standards. What they're going to do is force English teachers to teach history texts, not literary ones. So they're going to transfer, you can already see it with that list I showed you. They're already transforming English into social studies. Now they want to swallow history up in English class too. English language arts now will be social sciences. That's it. And so Sandy begged, and that's what explains this process. Sandy says, of that little literature that's actually left in Common Core, why is so much of it sexually, graphically, violently, developmentally inappropriate? We're back to the inappropriate. And remember, it's the Washington State Democrats, it's the Chicago Teachers Union. Who's telling you that Common Core is inappropriate for kids, particularly for young ones? Why is so much of the literature that's left so shockingly pornographic? This is one example. This is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Now, Morrison's a great writer. She's an African-American novelist. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature. We wouldn't assign a book like this, however, to freshmen in college. It's about a 12-year-old girl who's a victim of rape and incest. And over the course of the book, she comes to bond with her family member rapist, her father, and writes in shockingly graphic terms about the nature of their encounters. This book has been pulled out of Common Core classrooms for kids as young as middle school, 8th graders. This book has been pulled out of Common Core Catholic schools for kids as young as middle school. I blocked out the worst of it, but you can take a, I won't leave it up long, we do have some young ones here, but you can take a quick look, and you can see the kind of stuff that's being pulled out of middle school classrooms. Sandy says I've looked at them, there are at least 36 books in the Common Core exemplars alone that have this level of sex and violence in them. Books like I'll get off of it, books like Dreaming in Cuban, books like Black Swan, dozens and dozens of Common Core texts that are shockingly graphic. As Sandy says, what possible reason could there be? Well, there are reasons. And it's not just the high school kids. See, again, I've already taken too long, but if you gave me another 2 weeks, I could show you all kinds of examples, but if you just go to Google and type in sexualized Common Core lessons, you'll find 1,000 of these. This is not cherry picking. This is a feature of Common Core, not a bug. And even for the younger kids, right? This assignment here was meant for 8-year-olds, again, 3rd graders. Mom had to cross the assignment out, and she writes, inappropriate. I'm not explaining this to an 8-year-old. Why is it now that moms and dads all across the country, to the small degree they're even allowed to see their kids' homework anymore, that's why, by the way, they're not letting the homework come home anymore. Because when you see what your kids are doing in school on those computers, you would do this. So they've just decided you don't get to see them anymore. And here's the assignment. It's not a bad assignment in theory. You send the kids home with a paragraph, little kids. Have them read the paragraph and answer some questions. Who's the main character? What's the main theme of the article? Well, let me read you this short paragraph for 8-year-olds. Ruby sat on the bed she shared with her husband holding a hair clip. There was something mysterious and powerful about the cheaply manufactured neon clip that she was fondling in her newly suspicious palms. She didn't recognize the hair clip. It was too big to be their daughter's, and Ruby was sure it wasn't hers. She hadn't had friends over in weeks, but here was this hair clip, little and green, with a few long black hair strands caught in it. Ruby ran her fingers through her own blonde hair. She had just been vacuuming when she noticed this small, bright green object under the bed. Now their life would never be the same. She would wait here until her husband might return home. And an 8-year-old has to conclude from that paragraph that Dad is having an adulterous affair in Mom's bed. 8 years old. And you can see, the difference between what the high school kids are reading and the 8-year-olds is significant. But for an 8-year-old, really? And you see what the purpose of this isn't literary analysis, it's not ethics and morality. This is socially re-engineering your kids. And then you get this one. This one was sent to me, literally sent to me 4 days ago. We were down up in Jacksonville yesterday, and I mistakenly identified this because I just got it. Somebody from this area sent it, but it was in Gainesville, not Jacksonville. The Alachua School District?
Alachua.
This is from the Alachua School District in Gainesville. This is a 4th grader's assignment, a 9-year-old. This was sent to me by the dad 3 days ago from that school district, 4th grade, Newberry School, Newberry Center School. That's where this was from 4 days ago. Notice the assignment for a 9-year-old. This is what Sandy and others call social justice curriculum. It's not about reading. It's not about writing or math. It's about teaching left-wing Marxist social justice theory to kids using every subject area, right? This is what this is. And so you got the assignment here. The assignment in English class is cause and effect, right? You study about a cause and an effect, which seems okay, and then you see the actual assignment. One day, some time ago, a boy named Jack was doing his homework. His mother began to examine Jack's textbook. A puzzled look clouded her face. She noticed that the book was worn and missing a dozen pages. The next day, she told the school's principal that Jack deserved better materials. He agreed, but said that only schools in white districts got new textbooks. By the way, is that true? Has that been true since the 1950s?
No.
Only schools in white districts got new texts. Schools in African American areas got old, damaged textbooks. So Jack's mother met with a lawyer. They filed a legal case claiming unequal and unfair treatment toward Jack. A judge decided that Jack's mother was right. The Board of Education agreed to revise the system for providing materials for schools in the district. Given what you know about school boards and school districts, do you really believe there's a school district in this country that is willfully setting out to deny new textbooks to black schools? Is that even credible? And yet here you go. And please tell me what this has to do with anything other than at the age of 9, reinforcing in kids' minds, right? White privilege, racism,
Victimhood.
Right? The what?
Victimhood.
Victimhood and entitlement.
That would lead to riots in Baltimore.
Wouldn't happen. Wouldn't happen. And the Baltimore thing. So please explain to me how a city that's been controlled by Democrats for 80 years, that has a primarily black city council, a black mayor, a black police chief, a primarily black police force, all this happens and we scream white racism. Even black people are racist because of what white people have done. That's how that works. And you debate all that you want, but the fact is that that's exactly the mindset they're now trying. And you're, what, an hour and a half north of here? 2 hours north of here? I don't know how far north of here Gainesville is. But that's 4 days ago. And as far as the math standards go, in some ways they're even more shocking. You can sort of see how, I mean, at least kids are reading stuff in English class, even if it's not literature, even if it's not very good for them, even if it's too much pornography. At least in English they're still reading stuff. Math now is rapidly becoming not really about math at all. Talking to Professor Milgram, lie number 8 of Common Core. We've already talked a little bit about it, but this is slightly different. You know, we've all heard the argument that Common Core math has been internationally benchmarked. Have you ever seen any evidence that happened? Nobody has. 6 years into Common Core, there is not a shred of evidence, because if they had the evidence, they'd show you. Milgram showed up on the committee and said, okay, you say you've measured this against other high-performing math countries. What countries did you measure this against? And they handed him a list. Sweden and South Korea, Finland was on that list, right? And so Milgram said, great. Now let me see how you measured it. Where's your math? The entire time he sat on that committee, they did not present him a single thing. No, and 6 years into this, nobody's seen any evidence. In other words, it never was done. And so talking to Professor Milgram, I said, well, what kind of math is this then? If it's not designed to make our kids better math students, and he used the same words. This is social justice math. Here's the gist of it. It's not fair that so few kids can do math well. So we need to create a math program where every kid gets comfortable with a little math, and no kid's allowed to get ahead. That's social justice. You understand what that is? That's the common in Common Core, isn't it? Think about your own education. What percentage of kids in your grade school classes, your high school classes, could actually do math at the highest level? What percentage of our kids intuitively get math? 20%? 15%? Not many. Every kid can learn a little bit of math, but look, come on. In the same way that I don't care how many middle school, high school kids are ever going to read Shakespeare at a great level. Not many. Depends what your gifts are. God didn't make our kids the same kid. Our kids don't have the same gifts. One of the unique things about American education and American government up until recently was that individuals could be individuals. They could capitalize on the particular gifts they had without feeling that they were traumatizing the less gifted in those areas. Not anymore. The future utopian society demands that all kids will be the same kid. So you created a math program, as Milgram points out, in every high-achieving math country on earth. The place where, and by the way, all of them are fairly stable, fairly prosperous, fairly heterogeneous societies. Places like Thailand and South Korea, right? All of those are pretty standard. You don't have standard here. In fact, people keep coming here from all over the world because they don't want to be common. Albert Einstein said, in 1929, Albert Einstein said, you standardize automobiles. You do not standardize children. I do not want to live in a world that standardizes children. Right? And so, my time is running out, so I want to get a couple things in. The young woman here, Dr. Milgram pointed this out, gives you a good idea of what social justice math sounds like.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the way we...
All right. Now, I get that if you're in first grade, but not if you're a junior in high school. All right. And so one of the I mentioned Sweden and Finland and South Korea. In every high-achieving math country on earth, kids start serious algebra in 7th or even as young as 6th grade. Under No Child Left Behind America, our kids didn't even start algebra until 8th grade. And under Common Core, algebra is pushed completely into high school, 9th grade. And as Dr. Milgram points out, if your kids aren't even starting algebra till 9th grade, there's no way they ever get to calculus in high school. But that's the design, right? What percentage of kids can get to calculus? 8%? 7%? And because that 7% should not have that benefit if the other 93% will never get it, right? And then you get this, right? Some of you may have seen this. It's a university math professor who cannot help her math kid, her daughter, her 8-year-old daughter with her math homework. So she puts the little girl at the whiteboard and has her work a typical Common Core math problem. Here's your difficult math problem. Add those 3 numbers, 1568, 1423, and 680.
Can you solve that problem showing me the way that you learned how to solve it in school? And talk to me while you're solving it.
So we learned that a big square like this is 100. So we could make that 100 into a cube, which would make...
So a square is 100, a cube is 1,000.
That's 1,000. And now we still have to do 500. Could make that into 5 sheets.
So you notice how nobody's adding anything, right? This is just what you have to do to get the first number on the board.
And we have 60, which are just 1 to 10. For her birthday.
Now you got to put the second number on the board.
1,000. The dots represent 1.
Okay.
So now we have to add all of these together. So you could make 1,000. All of these together is 400. Now you need 600 more. So now I'm going to write the numbers down. So we have 1,000 plus, well, let's just say 3,000.
That's very mathematical, isn't it? Let's just say.
3,000 plus 1. So now we can erase all the sheets and hundreds and tens.
Prada, that problem you just solved took about 8 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're doing in school.
Listen to this.
But at home, I'm taught how to stack. And we're not allowed to do stacking in school. That's why we have to figure out.
Common Core
Okay.
prohibits
So I'm
this.
going to stack these numbers, which is very easy.
If you do that in Common Core to get an answer, you will get no credit for it. They will not allow that.
What are you thinking? You're looking at your problems.
I got 2 different
You got 2 different answers. What do you think happened?
Maybe I counted.
Okay, you get it, right? This is, and by the way, not every Common Core assignment looks like that. They're always different. If I was a horrible math student, if every time a square was 100, a cube was 1,000, even I could kind of figure that out, but it always changes. And I don't want to be glib about this. I understand that some kids learn differently, but as Milgram points out, that's not what this is. What that little girl was doing wasn't math. And if you are a kid who is intrinsically good at math, that's going to fry your brain. Why would you ban? Milgram says, I understand it. For kids who don't understand, for kids who can't get at the obvious mathematical way, let them do other things. But you're prohibiting precisely those kids who get math from doing what they can do. You're stopping mathematical kids from being mathematical in favor of teaching non-math to kids who don't get math. This is the death of math, right? And so the big problem is, one of the ways they teach math in elementary school, primary ways Common Core does, is it puts kids in little groups of 2 and 3. Teachers don't teach, they facilitate, or better yet, they stand by. Teachers hand the assignments to the group of kids. As Amanda August said, the purpose of the assignment is not to get the right answer. It's to agree get all 3 kids to agree on what they think the answer is. Got an actual exam from New York State from a few years back, where the question was 6 times 7. The little boy wrote 42, got it marked wrong. The teacher said, the other 2 kids in your peer group agreed on a different answer. So they got it correct. You didn't agree with the other 2 kids, so he got it marked wrong. This is the premise of what Milgram calls social justice math. The purpose of math is to teach equality. The purpose of the math is to socialize kids, to communally agree, not get the right answers. And by the way, don't listen to me, because that's Jason Zimba. That's one of the 5 who wrote Common Core. He is the chief architect of Common Core math. He is the guy most responsible for what you just saw. And in this short video, he admits on camera that it was never meant to make your kids ready for STEM careers. By the way, science, technology, engineering, and math. You know, the unimportant things. If we're not using math and science to prepare kids for careers in science and math, then what are we teaching it for? And he's going to admit on camera, it's not meant for STEM, and it's not meant even for college math. And the woman interviewing him, who you're not going to see, you'll just hear her voice, is Dr. Sandra Stotsky. She gets him to admit it.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition.
Yes, Dr. Stotsky, you're right. My program is a minimal definition of college readiness.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM, it's not for international.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges.
It's not only not for STEM, it's not for selective colleges. And when I play it again, he's going to give you an example. For instance, if your son wants to go to UC Berkeley, he better have pre-calculus whether he wants to be an engineer or not. But that's dishonest. You understand what we mean by selective colleges, right? A selective college is simply any college that has a basic math requirement. That's it. It's all of that. I won't stop at this time. Listen again, and it gets even worse at the end. It's a short clip.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM, it's not for international.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not,
you better have pre-calculus to get on
We
these,
have to think of our
right?
engineering colleges.
And that's
Scientific.
true. I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that, but your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that
I'm not
out.
just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get
Listen to
you.
this.
And that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
And all I can do is nod his head yes. Go watch the whole video, it's on YouTube. If you think I'm selectively editing this, go watch the whole thing. He beclowns himself even more in the full video. That's it. We didn't intend this to be STEM careers. So I ask you again, if math and science are not to prepare our kids to be good in math and science, then why are we teaching it? We're teaching it for social justice. Like this. How about this assignment for a 7-year-old, a second grader? Tell how to make 10 when adding 8 plus 5. The little boy gives a perfectly correct mathematical answer. You cannot make 10 with 8 plus 5. That's a little boy who gets math. The teacher marks it wrong and says, yes you can. I can't show it to you. It says, yes you can. If you can't call it up in 1 second, I think I got it memorized.
Okay.
But it's better if you see it. It really is. The teacher says, yes you can. Take 2 from 5 and add it to 8. 8 plus 2 equals 10, then add 3.
I'm going to try to scroll it down. Bear with me here.
If you can't, don't worry about it. I know we're bumping up against a time break, so.
There you go.
Yeah, yes you can. Take 2 from 5 and add it to 8. 8 plus 2 equals 10, then add 3. And if you think about that long enough, it kind of makes sense, but it's not math anymore. What that teacher just did is not math. I call it math Mad Libs. She's playing linguistic word games with numbers. Math is a very different thing. Math is precise. Math is efficient. This isn't any of that. And then there's this. Pop me back up.
Okay. I'm going to try.
The science, I need to give you this, the science. I told you that they're already slipping the science into your school without ever asking anybody at the state level. They're already putting it in. This is from the Next Generation Science Standards. Listen to this little clip.
So do you understand why this is inappropriate, Audrey?
Audrey Basie just wanted to get her bio homework on DNA done when she got to a question that stumped her. It reads, the sister of the mom above also had issues with finding out who the father of her baby was. She had the state take a blood test of potential fathers. Based on the information in this table, why was the baby taken away by the state after the test? And with that question, is it tacky enough? Look at the potential fathers. Bartender, guy at the club, cab driver, or flight attendant. Father Larry Basie took one look at this piece of homework and flipped.
What are they teaching? What is this? I couldn't come up with the words. I'm like, oh my God. It's teaching them that it's okay to not know who it is because you can have the state help you. And if they can't help you, they're going to take your child away. And it's not the way it is.
Were you fired up?
Oh, I was beyond fired up last night.
What really gets me about that clip, though, is both the reporter and the father missed the point. This is a science question that uses math to get the answer. Remember when we were in biology? But they did it with bunnies, not with promiscuous flight attendants and cab drivers. Something about the transportation industry and casual sex I don't get, because anyway, I flew in from Wisconsin, all they offered me was water and peanuts. Nevertheless, you remember when we were doing biology class? It was the pink bunny, the white bunny with the pink eyes mates with the brown bunny, and you simply had to use math. And the whole purpose was to do a probability. Did you see what they missed? The final answer has nothing to do with math or science. It is, tell us why the state took the child away from the mother after the blood test. What does that have to do with science or math? That's a morality question. It's an ethics question. It's a sociology question. So even with math, you see what's happening here? Math, too, is being subordinated to the sociology, the progressive politics, right? And then there's this. One more of these. This is for 4th graders. It's a 4th grade math Common Core activity. Notice what the activity is called for 4th grade math kids. Determining fairness. Please explain to me what math has to do with fairness. Numbers are numbers. Formula are formula. Equations are equations. Math and fairness have nothing to do with each other. Well, until now. And so notice the assignment. Always work with a partner, not a facilitator or a standby. Work with a partner. Write a ratio for each sentence. Compare the ratios. If they are equal, then you must answer it is fair. If they are unequal, then the answer is it is not fair. And then explain your reasoning. Write out an answer. That's not mathematical. Right? And by the way, if you're spending all this time discussing fairness, equity, critiquing capitalism, saluting Che Guevara, underwriting the Constitution, pushing promiscuous sexuality and strange flight attendants at the 300-mile club, if you're doing all that in math class, then you're not teaching much math, are you? But then again, that was always the example. And notice, the first example, you pay $184 for 2 tickets to a concert. I paid $266 for 3 tickets to the same concert. Green arrow. Not even what the ratio is. Is it fair? And at the end, on the box on the left, justify your conclusions. My conclusion should be the math is correct. End of sentence. But no. What information can you use to justify your conclusions? Who do you think you're going to be citing there? What does any of that have to do with math? Over and over again, that's what you've got. I'm going to end with this. I saved this for last. Most people haven't seen this. And we may probably need to see the whole slide on this one while I set it up. This is the second half of the Common Core copyright. You saw the first part, which proves the states didn't do this, which proves the governors didn't do this. And 2 lobbyist groups copyrighted the standards. Then there's this that nobody's seen. If Common Core is just a benign set of standards, help to make our little darlings, designed to help our little children learn, why are they indemnifying themselves this way? I've talked to over a dozen lawyers about this. They're blown away by this. They say this is not even legal. You can't indemnify yourself for everything, even if you've been warned of the damage that you're going to do. Well, if this is nothing more than a simple set of benign standards, why in the world do they go to this length? It says, under no circumstances shall the NGA Center or the CCSSO, individually or jointly, be liable for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, exemplary, consequential, or punitive damages, however caused, and on any legal theory of liability, whether for contract, tort, strict liability, or a combination thereof, including negligence, arising in any way out of usage of the Common Core state standards, even if you advise us of the possibility of such damage beforehand, even if we know what we're doing is threatening your children, even if we know it's harming them, you still can't sue us. And do you understand why Common Core math is developmentally inappropriate for the youngest kids? That video of that little girl working the math. 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds. Their brains have not developed to the point that they're abstract thinkers. When you put numbers in front of a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, they don't see anything but the number. If you start substituting numbers for symbols, little kids can't do that. Their minds short circuit, they can't make that work. You're asking, as Milgram says, you are asking our youngest kids to do mathematical things they cannot do. But with every subsequent grade, they do less and less real math, until by the time they graduate from high school, they're already years behind kids in most industrialized nations. That's what you're doing to our kids. You don't indemnify yourself this way if you don't know that what you're going to do to these kids is going to cause all sorts of problems. Thank you for listening very much. I appreciate it. we set up our
next speaker. It'll take a couple minutes. Let's take some questions and answers for Dr. Pesta.
Yeah, if you guys want to, and people probably need to go to the bathroom, but if you prefer me to urination, I'll sit in. I'll tell my wife that I was preferred.
I have a
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Why aren't you teaching teachers how to teach?
I do.
You're fabulous.
I do. Whenever, this is the other problem. You want to know what one thing you could do right now to fix this problem? Stop letting only university departments of education credential teachers. That's where we're losing this game. Your daughters and sons go to college. They want to be teachers. They mean well. Then they spend 4 years at the University of Florida or Florida State being taught by radical professors of education. Then they come out the kind of teachers that don't have a problem with Common Core. You got to understand something. The most radical department on any college campus, it's not English, it's not art, it's not theater, it's education. Why? There's nothing there. We made up education degrees. When your education departments want kids to learn how to teach English, they send them to me. When they want your teachers, your daughter's going to be a math teacher, the education department doesn't teach your daughter math. They send her to the math department. So in other words, the subject area is taught by professionals. History professors, English professors, math professors. All the education department teaches your kids is ed theory. All this radical Marxist social justice garbage that now you're seeing dominate the curriculum. You know what you can do? If you've been a CPA for 20 years, you're qualified to teach math, go do it. Let's get rid of the accreditation process and let good, competent, if you're a CPA, if you've been a writer your life, let them go teach. And by the way, you could pay teachers much better, couldn't you? If you've got a real published author teaching English, you got a CPA teaching math to kids, you'll have, and avoid all this other theoretical garbage. Bill Ayers, the unrepentant terrorist bomber, and I'll go right to you in a second. Bill Ayers, the unrepentant terrorist bomber of the Pentagon, the only career he had open to him was education professor at a major university, where for the last 30 years, he was at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and for the last 30 years, he made his entire educational platform, the place for communism in the modern world is in the elementary school classroom.